So I read this book. It's called The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. I've been eyeing this book for a while now. Okay. There is construction outside my house, so if you hear that throughout this video, I apologize. I really want to film this today, but since it's sunny outside and it's been raining for the last few days, they're going at it. Like, they haven't stopped since this morning, so I'm really sorry about that. I'm not sure if I can say that I love this book. I think I almost did. It's at that boundary between being a good book and being a great book. For me, at least, I don't normally read simple, sort of mundane books. I usually gravitate towards philosophical books that make me go crazy, books that, I can't put down, books that I can't sleep at night thinking. So reading this book is a breath of fresh air. It's very subtle, very simple. I can imagine reading this book while on vacation, while on a road trip. If you've watched Downton Abbey, the TV show, it's very similar to this book's setting. The main character being the head butler of an estate in London. You know that season in Downton Abbey where everyone was struggling with the changes in the society post-war? That is what is going on in this book with the main character having a different employer, and you see him struggling with how he interacts with the new employer. He has a different way of handling things, different way of talking. He really struggled to find a connection to his new employer. Throughout this book, he's picking up ways to meet his new employer on the same headspace. I actually almost said that I don't like this book. Thank goodness the ending redeemed it for me. I was able to push through because of the writing style, because it's so lighthearted. Instead of the story going linear, we get traces of the past from the main character's memories and him reminiscing about his life while he's on this journey, this road trip. The ending, most especially when he was in a conversation with Mrs. Ben. Mrs. Ben sort of described what love is based from her experience and how it differs from Mr. Stevens' perspective because he hasn't actually experienced it firsthand. It's very interesting to read, and I really agree with what Mrs. Ben said. On page 239 on my copy, she said, "You spend so much time with someone, you find you get used to him. But that doesn't mean to say, of course, there aren't occasions now and then, extremely desolate occasions, when you think to yourself, what a terrible mistake I've made with my life. And you get to thinking about a different life, a better life you might have had." I'd like to discuss a little bit of what I wrote here. I said, yes, everyone thinks love is supposed to be magical, all glittery and grandeur. Everyone has that expectation of love, but really, the real magic is found at the very end, and realizing that after everything else, you chose to stay. And not knowing how to explain that, why you stayed, that's the real magic. This advice coming from Mrs. Ben, there's a really big difference from hearing advice coming from someone who's been there versus someone from a movie, something that is fictional. And I think some people misunderstand what true love is because of the many movies in popular culture. We see a romanticized version of affection that builds a really high and unrealistic wall, and as a result, people expect magic to keep going. It's like being in a race. The most common mistake is people see that magic as the driving force to keep the relationship going, to stay in that relationship, and they keep looking for that spark. But really, I think it's not the driving force. The real magic is at the finish line. It's at that moment when you hear the applause at the end. Then you get asked, how did you manage to finish the race, even though you really struggled? And you don't have an answer. You can't describe it. You just kept going. You kept persevering. Before you know it, you're at the end. I think that moment right there, that is the real magic. There is this line right here on page 210 when he was asked, what do you think dignity is all about? And he responded, but I suspect it comes down to not removing one's clothing in public. I wish people still believe that, but it's far from what we see nowadays. How people talk, how people dress, how people present themselves in public, it's far from this. I really dislike where this generation is going in terms of how they interact with other people, how they present themselves publicly. I guess I'm just an old soul. I believe in dignity, I believe in sophistication, I believe in humility, and I believe in the use of words to reflect what you think. People, I find these days, they distort the language. I don't know, I guess they just don't appreciate the beauty of literature and reading and speaking. When you hear kids these days talk really trashy, I just feel disappointed. Again, like Mr. Stevens, he represents the older generation who struggles to understand the changes that's going on. But like him, we express what we think, but we don't really ponder too much about it. Like Mr. Stevens realized in the end, his prime has passed, and now he must learn to accept that whatever he's facing right now, he should just not overthink it. It's really okay to have an opinion on things, but to push that opinion on people, I think that's the boundary. This book is really simple, and at the beginning, I really wished it was more, but now that I've read it and I finished it and I've reflected on it, I think it's perfect the way it is. I understand the hype towards this book. I wouldn't want it written any other way. It's just perfect the way it is. It's very simple. And sometimes I forget about that because I'm usually bombarded with philosophical texts and books. I gave this book 4 stars. It's not exactly my favorite book, but I did enjoy reading it and I do recommend it. So if you want a light read, read this book.